Okay, so at this portion of the program, what we'd like to do is to hear from you. So just a reminder, before you leave, please leave your notes with either me, Hillary, or Mary T, so that we can compile them, and then we'll make them available to the art committee and the UPTRM committee if they would like a copy too. Okay, so make sure you do that before you leave. So what we would like is just to hear, we're not going to be able to hear from every single table in great detail, but if you could choose one topic that you would like to share or a decision in an area, that would be great. And then if you're at the next table, if you could choose something different, if you had the same sort of discussion, so we can get as most out of the time we have, okay?
Thank you. Table 3, we became very passionate about 2 of the questions, and I can summarize them very quickly. Question number 1, merit and the art document. The big question that came up for us is, if merit is removed from the art document, where does it go? Does it then become the venue of the department or the college, which leaves it open to inconsistency, and that merit adds yet another layer of expectations for faculty on top of the tenure and promotion issues? Is that okay? The second question that we became sort of immersed in was question number 5 about the Boyer model. The first question is, will it be kept in the art document? The question itself sort of implied that. And then we started talking about, do we really know the model? I understand it was a workshop many years ago, and that now new faculty members get that little booklet, and our suggestion was that this little booklet that was in the front be on the website, because many of us who have been here sort of in between the old days and the new days, we didn't get that, so we don't know it. We think that the Boyer, expectations need to be clear and transparent for everyone, and that for instance, in the Boyer model, it clearly says that teaching is scholarship. So people who are going up for promotion and don't get promotion because they didn't do enough research, can they then come back and say, wait, but I did a lot of teaching? So those sorts of issues, I think, just could be clarified by maybe having another workshop in January and focusing on the Boyer model and how to use it for promotion and tenure.
Thank you. Hold on. There,
I didn't know there were 2 mics. Hi, Jim Robertson, Political Science. We also focused on number 5, and I'm going to take the last thing we said first, because what we sort of came to an agreement was that in terms of what was said earlier, what we really need is for each department to, in their art document, include specific criteria for how they will evaluate each of the categories in the Boyer model. So it's not just left in sort of vague terms, but these are the kinds of things that we find acceptable and how we'll go about determining that. And then in terms of what scholarship is in any model, but Boyer model in particular, is that we had a discussion about what should be included and what kind of criteria we would use for such evaluation. And the general consensus, maybe is the right word, or moderate agreement maybe, was that number 1, such scholarship has to be peer reviewed. Number 2, it has to have intentional dissemination. We had some discussion and disagreement as to whether it needs to be connected to an individual's field of study, that there should be some kind of an evaluative critical response, and that it also could be evaluated on the basis of the impact of the work. But in any event, the key issue is that this should be explicitly stated in each department's art document for each category of Boyer. Is that? Yeah. Okay.
I guess we're next. A strong consensus over one. That was the only one. And we thought that the art should have separate sections for merit and promotion and tenure, and we had consensus that the annual merit review documents should not be included in the binders for promotion and tenure. So, and we had interesting conversation over number 2, and it ranged from the peer review process being completely useless and should be stopped to models of ones that we do in biology with large faculty numbers where everybody rotates through and there's a permanent committee that sees a person every year so that we get continuity as well as the whole department gets a chance to observe the person. Being a good model, but people from smaller departments says we can't do that. So.
Our group concentrated on 2 of the questions, 1 and 6. And so question number 1, so about the merit art divorce. So we talked about the history of the issue a little bit. One of the things we did decide was that they should be separate and that merit should be actually explicitly excluded from P&T discussions. And we had various reasons for discussing that. One is that somebody might submit, let's say, 6 papers per year, but if none of those are accepted, then that might cause you to do really well in merit, but then ultimately you might not get tenure as a result, right? And as also what tends to end up happening, which maybe is fair, is that merit tends to be more of an effort measurement, whereas promotion is more of an outcome or a deliverable measurement, right? That seems fair. We were concerned, like some of the other groups, about if they get separated, who has oversight of merit, right? Who gets approval and who gets to make the changes. And we also hope that if they get separated, that would maybe even clarify what merit is about, right? If you kind of clearly separate them, it might promote a better understanding of what its intent is, right, and how it gets done. And then very quickly about question number 6, which was faculty development. There was I think a shared concern that there should be an increase in support for scholarship. For instance, like consulting about statistics. So, if there are certain people who maybe aren't as confident as they would like about having statistical proof of something, right, have somebody on campus who can do that. There was a wondering about how heavily the OAI is used, and if so, why or why not. Mentoring of faculty is something that's highly variable across the university. So how to improve that and make it more consistent, right? There was a survey done about mentoring about 5 years ago that I think a colleague of mine was involved in. And so we don't know what happened as a result of that survey. And finally, is there some contradiction between maybe research expectations in the university right now and still our current categorization as, comprehensive or semi-comprehensive, and how that fits into faculty development?
We went with the very popular question 1 on merit. But I think we were a little bit more conflicted in this group. People thought that we should, yes, find another way to do merit outside of the PTRM committees within the departments, but that that it should still be a part of shared governance, but that perhaps the chair of the departments should still be involved. But I will give a couple of quotes from this group. That it is a sinkhole conversation. That time on merit is disabling. We spent our whole time on this particular question, so these conversations, you can see why these quotes were important to share. And that if merit does go as part of committees within the department, that the standards for merit should be flexible by department, and that there was really a split within the table here as to whether merit should be included or not included within decisions for PTRM, so that it should be somehow separated from PTRM, but it was such an ingrained thing culturally within the university that it would probably be still hard to tell people, no, you can't actually include this. You've gotten base plus 5 times, and now you can't use this as part of your PTRM. That might be very difficult to do. So it was a difficult conversation, a sinkhole, yes, indeed. Thank you.
Well, we got Susan Pasinic and then Mary.
So we also talked about question 1, and I won't go on about it too much, though we did spend about the whole hour on it. We were also split along the same lines and voiced the same concern about if there was a separate merit policy or document, who would have ownership of that? How would that still be part of shared governance? Not wanting the merit policy to change at the whim of new administrators, let's be frank. So that was a concern. But willing to consider having it separate from the art document. Two other things that haven't come up, we talked about number 7 on the list, and the concern about the portion of the art policy that you might want to change. Some concern about the intermingling of faculty and librarian information, particularly in Appendix 1, that becomes a little confusing, and that perhaps the hiring processes mentioned in Appendix 1 should be separated in the same way that Appendix 2 is separated from Appendix 3. So pretty simple thing, but thought that might be helpful. And regarding number 2, we discovered that at our table we had multiple different models. In one department, the PTRM chair assigns the peer evaluators. In another department, 2 other departments, faculty ask a colleague to do the peer evaluation, and in another department, a sub-leader of a division within the department of each division sets up the peer evaluations within their division. So the consistency is that there's no consistency. So we didn't have a recommendation, we were just reporting.
Thank you. Then we have Mary, Ashley.
Right, in terms of question number 1 on merit, the general consensus was in favor of separating the two, although we also shared the concern about who oversees it, who's responsible for it, and also came up whether perhaps this would be a role for a faculty senate if we had a faculty senate, so faculty still retained control over, how that policy is developed. We talked about peer evaluations. Again, the major thrust was that they be uniform, that there be uniform guidelines for peer evaluation, and also universal training for peer evaluators about how to actually conduct peer evaluations. Let's see. We did talk a little bit about the calendar and perhaps moving up that 3rd Friday in June date for submission of AR materials, because it's a very short turnaround time, especially for large departments when reviews have to be conducted. Or can departments institute earlier deadlines in their own documents? Is that allowed? And also including deadlines for the 3-year review cycle for UPTRM. We also talked about the Boyer model and essentially many of the same ideas, that there needs to be dissemination, there needs to be validation, it needs to be a critical review and evaluative for it to actually qualify as scholarship. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Other tables?
Hello. So we talked about a lot of the same things, so I'll pick a subject that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is the calendar. We did notice that there is nothing in the calendar about the president's letter, no mention of a date, and no mention of the period of time between which the provost writes the letter, and then if there's an appeal for the president to write the final letter. So that seems like something that needs to be addressed in the calendar. We also noticed that there is an issue with the appeals process to a college committee. There are 21 days by which the college committee has to consider an appeal on tenure or promotion, but it's unclear if that is, in some colleges, that's a vote on whether the candidate is going to be tenured or it's a vote on tenure or promotion, versus other colleges where it's a vote simply on whether there was an error in judgment. And so that seems to be 2 different ways of handling that 21-day calendar. There we go.
Thank you.
So we also had a considerable discussion on question 1, and I think the table agreed that it should be separate, but then where should it go and how should it be represented in the process is important. Also, we talked about uniformity, the principle of uniformity throughout the university. How does it affect equity, and should merit be divisible equally? And then if that's true, how and where should it be administered? There was some discussion about having it like a faculty development or special project assignment, but still having the faculty control to have that for their salary was agreed on. The second one I think we had was the timeline, moving it a little forward. What we suggested was moving it more towards the last week of August would give more time for departments to schedule and have that, and also make sure it's more, it's helpful for the process of review. We went into a little bit about the Boyer model, and then again, who we are we comprehensive? Are we comprehensive plus or semi-comprehensive? That also would affect how we go through the process. And I think one other thing which I don't think anybody suggested was if we do a very successful 5-year review or promotion, 5-year review process, not the full professor, what is the carrot for it? Can we include some, substantial or some carrot for it? Thank you.
Okay, hi. We talked about the popular merit question and also the calendar question. I'll just talk about the calendar first. We did discuss whether there could be a shift in the deadline for review of department and college policies and sort of the difficulties of working with deadlines. Also, considering the calendar, we discussed the president's letter, the possibility of combining the president's and provost's letter in one. We still would need to have some kind of clarity on for positive recommendations, but we would need to have some clarity for if they're negative decisions, rather, how that's handled and what the time frame is for that. So little creativity there. Okay, for the merit process, there definitely was an appeal in having more flexibility. However, we were also wondering whether the process would be possibly more stable and transparent if it were in the same document. So if it's moved to another document, sort of the approval process, I think has been mentioned before, and the transparency of that and the consistency, those issues would still remain. I think we saw the annual standards at departments and colleges as keyed to the P&T standards. So there is a relationship there that we do perceive, and possibly the sort of the issue of Merit Plus not agreeing with sort of the ultimate P&T decision, that might not be as big a problem as been reported. We were trying to look at this process, sort of setting that very contentious sort of financial issue aside, which sort of really muddies the waters here, trying to see what were the benefits and the relationships of merit to P&T and other issues. We do see it as a mentoring process, especially the peer review element. And one interesting idea was, could the PTRM committee, as part of its work, make a recommendation on workload to help faculty achieve sort of their goals on an annual basis? So make a recommendation to the chair afterwards based on what they've seen. Anything else? Pretty good. Okay, thanks.
Have we missed any tables? Okay. Then I'd like to thank you for coming. And Beth, you got a question before we invite the provost up for some concluding remarks?
One thing that didn't come up with the questions, but I'm wondering about, is that a few years ago, it was changed from people being protected at six courses for the first 3 years, when it's changed to the first 1 year. And so that's a substantial change in their teaching for their pre-tenure time, the first part of their pre-tenure time. And has there been any discussion about changing any other expectations, because it would seem that would leave less time for scholarship. So, and I guess the other part is there any chance that decision would be changed back at some point?
Yes, there is ongoing discussion, actually, with the President about workload in general and supporting the efforts of newly appointed faculty for more than a year in trying to ensure that they can be successful and that we can support them in their efforts. I just want to remind you that today is the 10th anniversary of Virginia Tech. We're very fortunate to be here. I want to thank you for your efforts. I want to thank you for thinking through some of these really knotty problems, to be honest. These are not easy issues that we've been trying to deal with. The committee will benefit hugely from the feedback that you've provided. Please make sure that you do hand your notes to Hillary or to Mary T. or to Maggie so that we can collate those and start to make some sense of them. I am now troubled by that document that you pointed out to us, Kathy, because it's an interesting interpretation of what Boyer actually says about teaching versus the scholarship of teaching. It's our document. And so I actually have electronic copy of Boyer, and I will see if I can't get that circulated so that you can actually see what Boyer intended. From my perspective, all of these questions are important, but I would like all of us, as we become more community engaged as an institution, as the President continues to drive this notion of BTU, that we find ways to reward folks who do that kind of work, who are out in the community, who are making an effort to be engaged, who are offering real positive experiences for our students. What does that mean in terms of their scholarship? Impact, peer review, they still count and they're still important, but we don't have to be so restrictive in the way in which we think about impact and peer review and dissemination and critical impact, that we avoid looking at those kind of things that actually help the institution and the individuals within it on a long-term basis. Obviously, each of your units needs to think about how that works out for them. And for some of you, it will be very minimal. But for others in other areas, it's hugely important. We want faculty out in the community. We want to be engaged, but we've got to find ways to recognize and reward that work in order that people will see it as valuable and important. So as you go back to your units and as you think about revising your own documents internally, please think carefully about what we mean by the scholarship of application. And I will make sure that Boyer is available to you. It doesn't mean to say we have to be stuck with Boyer, but I think it's a good place to start in our discussions. Thank you so much for being here today. This is always a valuable learning experience for those of us in the Provost's office who think we know exactly what's going on, when of course Maggie does, but I have absolutely no clue. So enjoy the weekend, happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you bright and early on Monday morning back at the grind.